Again, good evening, everyone. You probably thought that this title is a bit weird because it refers to the hell, but if you read the abstract of the talk, you know that the hell, in this case, it's just a literary reference to a medieval poem that is titled The Divine Comedy, and that has as its first part the Inferno, precisely the hell in Italian. This is the poem tells the story of a travel in the afterworld. This afterworld is shaped by the theology, the Christian theology, so it is divided in the hell, the purgatory, and the heaven. And this poem, The Divine Comedy, was written by an Italian named Dante Alighieri, and every Italian student has read The Divine Comedy, at least a part of it at some point in his education. And so when I had to elaborate somehow about my disappointments as a data scientist, this literary masterpiece became a sort of end template to fit in my frustration as a data scientist. This is an opinionated talk, and of course, what you will hear, it's precisely my personal opinion. I hope that there will be some time during the Q&A to discuss what would be instead your map of hell from the point of view of a data scientist. I turned into data science about 3 years ago. Previously, I used to be a science writer, and before that, I used to be a researcher, and both are fields in which you always end up with different perspectives. So I thought I was quite used to deal with people for which things different meanings. And yet, when I turned into data science, I realized that if you put people and data in the same sentence, the most awkward things are going to come out. And this at times has also been a source of frustration, and this talk is a sort of outspoken response to this frustration. But it is also a try to make a sense of the not so positive experiences I had sometimes as a data scientist, and to somehow put on the table the data malpractices that I have encountered, and to make a list of them for myself, and also to take some satisfaction. Because this Inferno by Dante is the place where, according to the Christian theology, the sinners are punished. And in this Inferno, there is it is structured as a funnel, and in this funnel there are 9 circles where the sinners are located. And these sinners, according to the Christian idea, are punished for eternity in hell. And the punishment are assigned by Dante according to this contrapasso law. That is to say, the sinner's punishments either resemble or contrast with the sin that was committed. In the hell, at least in Dante's hell, the sinners, the severity of the sins committed increases going from top to the bottom. And so at first you meet the people who did things not so bad, and at the bottom of the hell you find the people who did very bad things. I will use this template to somehow bring to the fore 9 data malpractices that I've encountered as a data scientist, and that I really, really disliked. So I would like to start with the first circle of hell, and in this first circle of hell, I would really place the people who do not pay attention when they create data files. In particular, the people who create invalid CSV files, because it is quite often you end up with people who use commas within the data fields without escaping them properly, and this of course makes the file not properly readable. I feel that these people deserve a punishment and a place in hell because it means that they don't think about what CSV means, that is comma-separated files, and also because evidently they don't check their data files once they have created them. And for this very reason, I think that they should be punished by having to replace by hand every single comma that is a separator in a semicolon, so has to avoid problems, and they have to do it by hand. This is a task that is going to take quite some time, especially when the CSV is big, and I think that, but of course they are in hell, and so according to the Christian theology, they will stay in hell for eternity, and so they have all the time available in order to do the job. And I think that in the end, they will also understand why data scientists thought that they deserved a place in hell. One level below the people who create an invalid CSV file, I place the people who don't leave an empty data field empty, but feel the necessity to fit a placeholder in it. I find these people, the work of the action of these people is especially problematic because it creates a lot of trouble when you have to clean the data set, and mostly because you get totally disappointed because checking for empty values is usually the first thing you do with a new data set. And once you have placeholders that somehow hide the missing value, you are at first convinced that your data set is very well made, and then you have sadly to realize that this is not the case, and you have even to spend time in order to get out these placeholders and to get the data set in the conditions in which it could have been given to you, that is without placeholders for the missing values. I think that a right punishment for these people is that they should be constantly reminded that there is nothing wrong about not knowing things and admitting it, and therefore they should leave a missing value for a missing value an empty data field. In the one level of the hell below, I place what I call the standardization villains. That is to say, the people who don't pay attention when they do data and they don't adopt proper standardization measures. In this category, I put the people who use a multiple version of the same country name, the people who confuse physical and political geography, the people who use multiple formats for date and time. Cleaning a data set for which no standardization has been employed in the making is a lot of trouble, and this trouble could have been easily spared if, because there is something called the International Organization for Standardization, ISO in brief, and this organization has been in existence for over almost 80 years, and if you browse their website, you find an answer for very many standardization problems in terms of data. And so I think that the right punishment for these people is to learn by heart all the ISO standards, in particular the country codes, the currency codes, and the date and time formats, because these are the three types of information that most of the times you encounter and that are usually a lot of trouble if you don't have them properly standardized in a data set. One level below, I place the people who create far, far too long identifiers. And in this case, I mean the people who use something that is very important, that is a unique and persistent identifier, but do it in a way that becomes counterproductive, because if the identifier becomes too long, or if you try to put too much information into it, and people need an encyclopedia in order to understand what kind of information is embedded in your data, in your identifier, then I think that this is really missing the point. And this is the reason why I think that the right punishment for these people is to provide help desk support 24/7 and until the end of time for the identifiers they created, because they have to listen day in and day out to the people who call them and ask, what does this mean, why it is so, why it was created so, and they have to repeat and repeat and repeat what these identifiers mean. I think that at the end of time, they will have also agree that sometimes simplicity is the key to success. We are now going to the fifth level of VL, and I would say that at this point we are switching from scenes, from the previous scenes that I would call venial, because if people had been had paid more attention, could have been spared, to scenes that are structural, because there is something really wrong in working with data, for instance, in this case, not using metadata. And this is because if you have a data set and you don't have metadata that describe this data set, or you have an insufficient amount of metadata to describe properly the data set, then your data is basically unusable. And I think that the only punishment for these people is to be forced to do a meaningful analysis of a data set that was handed them over without metadata. Think if this data set is a data set of measurement and the column headers don't have the units of measure for these measurements. This is basically an impossible task, and I hope that this will be a way to convince them that metadata really have to go with data, and as it is recommended by all the usability guides about data. One example are the FAIR principles for scientific data management. One level below, I place the people who ignore machine readability. When I started working in data, I took that everyone who had to do with data shared the idea that machine readability was an essential requirement. I had to, I've learned that this is not the case. There are many people who work with data and don't think enough about machine readability. This is, of course, a problem, because if the data are not machine readable, it becomes a problem to work with them. And I think that the right punishment in this case is that these people are asked to transform a non-machine readable data set, and I can think as an example at an heavy formatted workbook, and they need to make this transformation into machine readability without committing any mistake. Without making any mistake, I think that this task is basically impossible to accomplish, because you will never be able to have a perfect transformation, given all the tricks and all the somehow customized solution that you have to come up with in order to make your data machine readable. And so I hope that being given an impossible task, they will also realize that machine readability is really a non-negotiable requirement when you work with data. One level below in VL, I place the people who invoke APIs as if APIs were magical tools able to solve all data problems. these people, in my experience, do not have a clear idea of what an API is, but they probably read somewhere that API are helpful when you work with data, and so they ask you an API, but they don't tell you what are the source and the target systems for your API, what amount of data traffic you should expect, and also in the end, who should query this API. This of course doesn't make the work possible, and I think that the punishment, the right punishment for these people is to ask them to answer truthfully. They cannot lie. 2 questions. The first one is, why do they talk about things they don't understand? Because I think that the bottom line is that they are talking about something for which they have no technical competence, but building a data infrastructure is really a technical task. And so the solutions, for instance, building or not building an API, should be left to the people who have the expertise to make these choices, and should not be somehow asked randomly. And the second question is, why should the data scientist be the one to build an API? I don't think personally that the data scientist is the best person to build an API. There might be cases where the data scientist can help and has relevant expertise, but I think that in order to make an API that is reliable, stable, and scalable, you need to have also web development competencies, data engineering competencies, and not necessarily a data scientist has these competencies. He's just the data guy, and so has to do everything. But I think that this give me an API philosophy is really not going to bring value, and I hope that the punished people will realize that. We are now in the second last circle of hell, and here I place the people that I dub the AI fanatics. These people are those that advocate the use of AI without really thinking whether AI is necessary or even advisable. One example that comes to my mind is the indiscriminate use of generative AI for writing code, and without asking what is the kind of reasoning that is behind the code written by generative AI. I think that this reasoning, there is no human reasoning at least, and this human reasoning, however, is the basis for being able to write code that other people can understand. And I think that this is especially problematic because a philosophy professor tested ChatGPT, for instance, with the logic assignments of his students, and realized that ChatGPT is incredibly bad at doing, for instance, truth tables and truth trees that are exercises that can be completed with rule-based reasoning. But this kind of rule-based reasoning is really at the core of the work of a programmer who writes code, and so I'm really not sure what can be the result. I also think, I am really much annoyed by all of these API AI hype personally, because I think that it is creating expectations that cannot be matched by the technology long term, and at the same time is diverting attention from tasks where using AI really makes total sense. I have also no doubt that we don't really need AI as such. We need an AI that is environmentally sustainable, economically sustainable, and socially sustainable. Otherwise, AI will be something that is not just controversial, but simply doesn't help anyone. And it is for this reason that I suggest, as punishment for the AI fanatics, that ask to read and reread the book Computer Power and Human Reason. This is an old book. It dates back to the 1970s, and it was written by a computer scientist, Joseph Weizenbaum, who had written one of the first programs that allowed human-computer interaction. Is a program named ELIZA, played the role of a psychotherapist and gave the impression of replying as a psychotherapist to the person who was giving the input. But of course, there was just a machine and not a human being. And Weizenbaum wrote the book when he realized that people were starting to not to see that before them there was no human being, just a computer. And also that he was even really shocked when practicing psychotherapist suggested that Eliza could be transformed in a sort of automated tools for psychotherapy. And in his book, Weizenbaum makes two key points. The first one is that there is a substantial difference between human intelligence and the computational power of a machine. And also that even when computers can do some tasks, it is immoral to substitute a computer for a human function. And these are the words of Weizenbaum, that involves interpersonal respect, understanding, and love. At times when people are suggesting that ChatGPT can be used in mental health apps, I think that there is still a point in reading this book and in suggesting it to the AI fanatics. We are now in the last level of the hell, and here I place the worst category of sinners. For me, these people are those who do not understand that data are about people, even if you can't see the tears. That sentence is given in quotation marks because it is not mine. I just borrowed it from a witty statistical book that was written by a statistician working in a cancer institution. In this chapter, whose title sounds Statistics is about people, even if you can't see the tears, the statistician tells the story of when he asked a cancer researcher to provide some information about the survival curves that he had printed in some of his papers. And the cancer researcher said no, because he feared that the statistician could use this information in order to undermine the findings of his findings. And this is quite a shocking story, because a survival curve is precisely what it says. That is, it gives an idea of how many people are alive after a certain time from diagnosis. It is therefore clear that even though you have numbers to describe the curve, these numbers are individual tragedies, and these individual tragedies should never be forgotten. And unfortunately, it is too often the case that data are just considered data, regardless of what they are referring to. And I think that this is really a very bad sin, because I think that there is a moral and an intellectual commitment, and this is an imperative commitment, in my opinion, not to confuse things, to keep seeing what the data are really representing, even though when they land on the desk of the data scientist, they are taken completely out of their context. But the tears are still there. And I think that the punishment for these people is to make them see these tears. And not only to see the tears, but also to think how would they feel if this data were data that referred to them or to their family members. I think that they would not be indifferent to the data anymore. Wow, we have made to the end of my map of the hell. As I said from the beginning, this was an opinionated talk, but it is now enough from my side, and I would be curious to hear what would be your map for data science. Thank you.
Heather, that was a great talk. Thank you very, very much. And I really, the creativity of it and your slides were amazing. So thank you very much. We do have one question, if I could share, and it was, could you give an example of when physical and political geographies are confused?
Yes, one example that comes to my mind is Borneo. Borneo is the geographical name of an island, and this island is divided within three countries that are Indonesia, Brunei, and another country. Sorry, I can't remember, but it happens, and it's not so infrequent that people in the country field they put Borneo, but Borneo is not a country, and this is the reason why I say that I get annoyed when people don't standardize a thing, because if you have your country name standardized, you immediately realize that you can't put Borneo in this context because Borneo is simply not a country. This is one example.